So let's go over the week 3 U code checkpoints. So what our goals are for each checkpoint, and we did the AI one before this one, and before that we did the colon. So now we're seeing how well are you translating the concepts that we're doing, going over with colon, and then trying to reinforce with the AI, and now actually giving you a chance to code. Okay, and this is where you translate and you build your a deeper understanding of the code that you've been working with. Okay, so this week we're going to do a custom order form. So just to remind us about what we did last week, week 2, is actually to build just a button. Matter of fact, let's actually go look at it. And in that, I actually want to show you what I have my VS Code right now. So in VS Code, I have my base folder. Now for me, I have more files or repos than you will. You will most likely have 2. Now that's not true if you're using CodeSpace. You can either open your public or your private. Okay, so in this case, we're going to be working in the public only. So for those of you working locally, you could just open that repo by itself. I needed some files for this demonstration from other places, so I didn't do that. But often, if I'm working solely in one repo, that's the one I will just open. I'll just do file open, and then I'll go find that one particular one, and that's the one I will open. Okay, just because it kind of minimizes what I see on the screen, but that's just me. And I also now have my live server going. Okay, so let's just look at, that's what I was bringing this up to show you. So when I start live server, I get a list of all those files in my base folder, and then I can select. So now I'm going to go into the pub. I'm going to right click on week 2. Okay, so we can remember what that was, and I'm going to right click on week 3. Now all I'm doing here is just showing you, like, here's what we did in week 2. We had a button, we had some text, and then we listened for that button. We handled that on DOM. On the DOM loading, we had an init function. I believe we did an init function there. We actually could go look, and this is always good to, I haven't looked at that code in a minute. So let's see, we had DOM listener that says when the DOM's loaded, then add an event listener once the DOM's loaded for add button. Okay, so we have this add button here on the HTML. So if we go over to here, we know we had a button, we had an ID on that button. This is a review, right? This is a review of what we're doing because we're building on those concepts this week. So then we had an event listener on the DOM. When the DOM was loaded, and even though we put defer in the script tag, we then said, hey, once that's loaded, then here's your callback function. Not important totally right now that you get that, but now that the DOM is loaded, add the item button, which we had a reference to up here by getting element, looking at the document, the whole page, getting element by ID, that specific ID, so we have a reference to that. Okay, so if I was to refresh here and I was to run, I can roll over and see where that reference, that variable to that DOM element is. Okay, so if I run this one, I see that was only that button. So it's a reference to the button, and then down here, I actually say, hey, when the DOM's loaded, add an event listener that when you click, you're going to run, in this case, this function called update total. Now we're building on those concepts this week. Okay, so this week though, what we're going to do is we're going to change this to be a step up from that. So instead of just clicking a button, we're actually going to input different things. Okay, so if I wanted to say one shirt, large gift wrap, now we're actually going to do similar things. We're going to get a reference to the elements. Now we haven't gone into this code because this is what you're going to write, and I'm going to go over the instruction for how to do it, but we have a button. Now in this case you can add a button, or you can add a listener for the entire form. Okay, it's actually, there's 2 ways to approach it depending. Typically though, we add a form event listener, but when this button happens, when it's clicked, now it's going to throw some content back, it's going to update text content for that output. Okay, So when we're looking at this, we're building upon similar things that we've already learned and adding new things like how to get DOM references, right? This part we already knew. So, but also because what we've done in the carbon footprint is we've learned new skills this week, right? We've learned how to create a module file. So you'll do that this time. It'll be named differently. Now, in this case, I'm going to say the reason I want to go over this in a review style is that you really want to think about saying, how well can I code this, right? By understanding the concepts. It's not that you shouldn't look at the code here because it's going to have some, it's going to give you some guidance, but be willing to be in that uncomfortable thing of, oh yeah, how do I do that without actually looking at that first? And the idea is not to spend a ton of time, but if you don't give yourself some time to think about that, that's actually where you build your own mental capacity to actually understand code and be able to write it. Okay, so I just gave you, by just jumping off point, here's what we're going to do for this form, or for this code along. Okay, so we're actually going to build this custom form to have inputs that we then output to the screen, but then doing a bit more by doing modules, and you'll see what we've learned, and really also objects. So we're going to do module, objects, and data extraction. Only use code that we've covered in the course. So now you're a store that sells custom t-shirts. Oh, that's awesome, right? So in this case, in my public repo, so what you're going to do is take your week 2 first, create a folder for week 3. It should be at the same level. So when I say at the same level, that's what this means. So then I took the files, copied them, created that new folder. And how did I do it? I came over here, right? New folder. And then I created that W3, and now I copied them in. Now, this is the state at the end. Okay, now I haven't done the last commit here. That's why these U's are here. But then I created a new file here, which you will do on the instruction. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do here is once you take your week 2, right? So this is the instruction I just covered, right? And then you're going to replace the body. Okay, so the body, not the head. The head section, though, you do want to make one change, and here is that section, that code. So before, when we did a defer, and we saw this when we did the colon, now we're going to change that to actually be type module, because we're going to end up importing a new JS file here. Okay, so now in the body, now we have this content. Okay, now this content is a form. Okay, so now it's the body, it has a H1, it's got a form, that form has an ID. Okay, we have quantity, this is a label for this input right here, that is looking for type number. Now we know even though it says type number, we still have to parse int. Now what does that mean? It means it comes in as a string, even though it says number, and we still have to convert it. So this is the way the UI has handled it, but as coders, we actually have to tell it, hey, change that to an integer. Okay, we have an ID. Oh, why would we have an ID right here? And how do we then get a reference to the quantity? How do we get a reference to the size? And how do we get a reference to the checkbox? Again, if we look at these, right, quantity, size, checkbox, okay, are here. So coming back here. Now, the way we did it in the carbon footprint was actually more of a best practices for a larger project, right? And let's just remind ourselves. So I'm going to go over to the form handler here and remind us, how did we get access to the entire form? Well, we set up a variable, we said get element ID, and then we referenced the ID. Okay, and then for each of the inputs, we ended up saying, hey, now that you have a reference to the form, we're going to query select. So look in that reference and find me the ID for household members, right? Now that's one way you could do it. But you could also, for each of the inputs, just use get element by ID. Because the key is you need in your sorry, I'm jumping around too much here. You need to be able to have an access to all your inputs here. Okay. Now, the one that is a little different is the one where we have radio buttons, because remember, only one radio button can be selected. In order for us to determine via function, which is what this does, right, is we have to say, hey, on your reference, you're going to tell us any of the inputs that have this input name diet type. Now, this is the carbon footprint, but remember here, our name is size. Okay, so we would then say query selector, the input, and then looking for. So let me slow down because I don't want to throw you off there. So we say, now again, you could go right at document query selector instead of carbon footprint. And the reason I'm actually talking about this is that you may see this different ways when you look at code. So you want to know the way we've written it is not the way you may see code other places, and really what you want to do is just start understanding code. So now you could have document query selector all, look at the inputs, and return anything that has a name that matches my string value. Now in this case we had two of them, right? Because we had two different inputs for radio buttons, and so for ours we only have one. Okay, so scrolling back down. So now we're going to set up, right? So we're going to set up this order handler, right? And its only job is to look at the form and return the data. Okay, and now we're going to select your elements. Now this is what I was just talking about. So you need a reference to the quantity, to the GIF box, checkbox, and the size. Okay, and then it tells you here, right? This is what I just told you. For this one, you definitely have to use this because you need all of them. And for these, you have a choice about the way you do it. So this is where, you might say, you know what, I might try it a little differently than we did in the carbon footprint just to see the difference. Or you might go, you know what, I'm still understanding this. I'm going to actually use that pattern of getting element by ID for the form and then looking and querying inside. All right, so then on your main function, you're going to export. You're going to create a function in this case, your main function, meaning the main thing that it's doing, just like we did in the carbon footprint. We had right here, get form element. So in here, again, you need to use the specific names here, is get order inputs. Okay, and now it's going to return an object. Now I'm going to cover this because it is such a good thing to understand, and that's why we're doing this work. Now in an object, we're actually going to create an object literal, and these will have keys of quantity, size, and GIF wrap. Okay, that's your keys. And it tells you what this needs to be. The quantity is a number, parse int, size is a string, GIF wrap is a boolean, and this dot checked helps you determine, right? Because when you look at that reference and you do dot check, that gives you a true or a false. This gives you a string, and this gives you a number. Sorry, size. Yep. Okay. So now let's actually review how we did this in the carbon footprint. Okay, so in the carbon footprint in the app.js, we're not doing the rest of this. The thing we did was we imported that, and in this case we have a different name, right? So I actually tell you, and the thing you're going to from would be your new file that you're creating. And now when you do that, and I'm going to show you via way of, actually, I'm going to make sure I didn't. Okay. So I could actually come up here, I could set this, right? And I could reload in order for me to walk through to see if my references worked first. I could say, oh, you know what? Let me just step through this. Now, why would I do that is I can scroll back. Let me just show you by actually going here, is when I roll over that variable that has been declared from referencing, in this case, the carbon footprint, that ID, that is the reference. So I want to make sure when I'm doing this here, I can make sure that that's also true. It's just a way to check to see if you wrote the right code. But in this case, this main, for you when you're writing here, right, what did we call it? Get order, what did we call it? Right. So main helper function, I'm just looking at the name. Oh yeah, here it is. Actually, it doesn't tell you the name, does it? Oh yeah, it does. Here it is. Okay, get order inputs. So that's your function name, your main. That's what we were talking about. So now let's go back here. Okay. So this is the equivalent that we already wrote. It's a function, right? It gets called, and the first thing it does after it does a console log here is it actually says, I'm going to set up an object literal. That object literal is going to have keys and values. The value it has is going to be set, right, dynamically. It's actually, if I just put that number hard-coded in here, now by the way, you can actually do what I just did. You can select over this and determine what that value is going to be set at. If I actually not at this case, what it is right now, parse int that value, because I already have a reference to it. So in this case, we're doing the same. And in this case, we're saying, hey, dot checked. Okay, so this is where this key is going to be a true or a false. These are going to be numbers. This is going to be those radio buttons. Now, in this case, this is going to be a Boolean value. How does it get set? It gets set by running this function, passing in the reference to those buttons, iterating over. Okay, so that's what this does. So let's just review, because I think it's a really good time to review this. Do I have another? I don't. Yeah, let me actually stop this one. So I was using that breakpoint just to see the references. So I'm going to let it run. And now in this case, I'm going to reload it. And now I have a breakpoint here. Now the reason this is being thrown is what I was saying before, is where it's defined in the app.js. So let's return this object, but in order for us to return it, right, what happens if we don't see this step, because it just sets the value, but it actually stops when it does this one. So the next thing it's going to do when I hit step here, it's going to run whatever function I have here, because it's the first one in this list. So if I hit step, hits the return, okay, and then it says, okay, I'm going to pass in those radio buttons. Okay, I'm going to iterate over for each button, right, that I have a reference to, because I have multiple buttons. I will call that radio. Now again, come up with your own file name so that you see how well you have this. Okay, I'm going to hit step, and it's gone. And now if I roll back, I can see the first one actually is, in this case, look at this. This is a reference to that first button. Now in that first button, it is radio checked is actually true. Okay, so actually, how do I know that? I could do this, and it is actually true. So if this is true, then this runs. Okay, so what will happen here, it'll say if it's true, we know it is true right now because it's the first one. I hit step, it says, okay, I'm going to console log, and now I'm going to return the value. And that was the string that we set on the radio button, and now I return. Now now actually, believe it or not, when it runs again, it's actually running the next one. For our purposes, we only need to run that helper function once, and that's really where I got started here, is you're going to write a helper function, but in this process I wanted to remind us what that is doing functionally. Okay, so now you're going to export, right, creating an export for that new function. You're returning the object. That's what we just talked about. Here are the keys and the values that you will need. Now in this case, I ended up adding a sanity check, because this is something we didn't do when we wrote the carbon footprint, but it's really good to do when you're actually, after you write this, right after you create this module, because you don't have the rest of the code. But what you can do, and actually I changed this already, I saw an error in this earlier, is you just have to add this into the app.js in order for you to actually walk through that. And how you can do that is you do a console.log inside of the order handler. Now, why am I doing this? I'm doing this so I see if my logic is correct. Okay, so let me show you. I already have it in this one. I'm going to let this run. So when you finish writing the order handler, then you can, in your custom order, your t-shirt ordering form, is set a breakpoint, reload, and now it will actually step. Okay, so you can actually see it. Okay, rocking through. This is what we just did, iterating over those radio buttons. When it gets a check, yep, okay. Now we know we ran it twice. And now it's actually just setting up the rest of the file. But look what happened here, right? It console logged out. It showed us, right, all that object, because what happened was here, it console logged that, and because that had a return value. So it's just a way, and this is what I said in here, right? Save your files and do your dev tools to walk through it. And what you should see, I mean, if you don't do your dev tools, you should see this object come out, right? And if you get a failure, that's when you need to troubleshoot this. And the reason I'm doing this step is because when you really need to write code and troubleshoot, write code and run it, debug it. Okay, troubleshooting is actually the idea of finding a bug that is in your code that may be creating an error, and that's such an important skill that you gain. Okay, so now once you get everything working the way it should, okay, you can end up, this is a temporary test, right? Once it works, then you can delete that console log in the order handler file, right? And then you can leave the import in the app.js. All right, so then do your commit. Make sure everything works before you move on, because now the work is actually going to be done in the app.js. So clear out the code from week 2, now except for that import that we did, right? And now we're going to write the code for the rest of this, right? So we're going to get a reference to the form. We're going to get a reference to the summary, right? So reference to the form, we know how to do that. Get element by ID, the ID of the form. Right, we're going to get a reference to that summary. So this, if I was to look down here, right, if I was just to look, and by the way, we could look at the HTML as well. We have an ID here, so I know how to do that. Okay, so then we're going to create a function, handle order. This accepts an event argument. This is like what we did in the carbon footprint, right? So if I come back over here, I look at the app, right? We have that function that handles the form submission. Now again, use the names. What was the name here? Handle order submission. Again, changing the names helps you really deepen your concepts here. Okay, so in this case, right, we're actually, let me go back down here because here's where I was. We handle the form submission. This is where we prevent default, because we're going to handle the submission. We're going to set up a variable that is from calling that module, whatever name we gave it, that's in the instruction. We have a different function, and then we could console log that out as well, and then console log, because we actually have a returned object literal. Okay, and then we also want to set up the init. Now there's different ways you could do this as well. I ended up nesting my event loader, my DOM, waiting for my DOM to load, and then I loaded an event listener. But however you do it, right, what you want to do, and then I say this here, is create your init. Oh, by the way, I didn't actually cover this. So update your text content of a summary div to show the order details, right? This is where I was saying I actually need to do the little better here. I do have the object return, so I needed to finish that particular part of the instruction. Attach an event listener when the form is submitted. Now we're adding the event listener to the form. We added the event listener in here to the button. So now we want to add the event listener to the actual form itself. We'll see later other benefits of doing that, right? And then when your DOM is ready, call your init. Okay, test everything. Make sure it creates the right output. Now I did have, and I will put this, I thought I'd include it also, some like I did in week 2 is actually some troubleshooting. If you see this, try this. But the key is give this a try, reach out for help if you need it. The sooner you reach out, the better. Really give this the time and attention that it needs. Make sure you do that last commit. And if I come back here, this is where, making sure you check your console, using your dev tools, push. Remember, we're working locally until we're ready to actually push it to GitHub. Update your URL like before. Now we're at week 3. Do your click test, make sure it works. This is how it's graded. And again, AI policy, use discouraged. Okay, and if you do use it, you need to tell us what prompts you used, and don't use code outside of the course. Okay, all right. I know it's a lot, but it's a great assignment. Honestly, it's really where you take what you learned this week and see how well you translated it. All right, I hope you have fun with this. I know me doing it yesterday, it's like I really made myself not look at the carbon footprint. I think I did once where I went, oh yeah, I forgot how we did that. But I'm not saying that should be your standard. Your standard should be wherever you're at. You want to allow yourself the room to deepen your knowledge, be uncomfortable, but also don't spend a lot of time there because there is help available. Okay, talk to you later.